Serious, what is something scary that has happened to you that you cannot explain rationally? When I was in uni I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a house in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing of walking places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would walk to, often between 12 am to 3 am, since I was a massive night owl. Well, one day, after finishing an essay at about 2 in the morning, I decided I was hungry, but didn't really have anything easy to cook, so I decided to walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab a pie or something. However, as soon as I opened my door I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding, I started shaking, the works. Telling myself that this was ridiculous, I walked out to the street with the intent to still go, but that was as far as I got. I was terrified for no reason that I could understand, but no less intensely despite that. I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Later the next day I heard about a group of drunk guys that were causing havoc down near the intersection at the 7-Eleven. They'd beaten up someone from my unit. Even though I can't explain it, I'm convinced something bad would have happened to me that night if I had ignored that feeling and gone anyway. I'm a little late, but screw it. I was in first grade, hanging out at recess with a friend. He was shooting some hoops outside, and I was playing DS, sitting on the pavement. I remember him asking me if he could make a shot from halfway across the court. I told him he could try, but he probably wouldn't make it while looking at my DS. Suddenly, my dad asks me what I mean, and when I look up I'm sitting on my living room carpet talking to my dad, and it's dark out. I was sitting in the same position, playing the same game, same level, and same exact spot in the level. Everything continued normally that night, and I didn't tell anyone at the time, but looking back it is really freaky. I thought it was a dream for the longest time, but thinking about it, it didn't really feel like a dream, and I don't really remember dreams that well. I posted this a long time ago, but when I was younger my mom was dating this guy, who we will call JB, and after a few months he invited my mom, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan, but up in a more secluded area which was pretty awesome. Well, we got up there, and for one I already felt really creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic, story house that had the living room, dining room, kitchen on the first floor, and had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. His grandfather had helped to build the place with the grandfather's dad, and then he lived there for most of his life working as a tailor in the nearby town. We went up to the attic to get some beach toys, because that's where JB kept all of that stuff, so he didn't have to haul it every time he went out there. Well, when we went up to the attic I noticed in the corner covered in some dust and cobwebs about 8 mannequins, some just upper torsos and some full body. Not too out of the ordinary considering a tailor had lived there. Me and JB's son slept down in the living room on the couch since there were no more beds, and near midnightish I heard on of the stairs squeak a few times. Figuring it was my mom coming to check to make sure we were asleep, I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned the TV off and hid under the covers. After not hearing any noise for a few minutes I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Like their body parts weren't moving, but they were sliding around the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming, but was so terribly frightened I hid back under the covers with a small yelp and then heard the dragging on the floor coming closer and peeked out seeing one of them just a few feet from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes tight hoping it would go away. Next morning I got up and tried not to think about it, really hoping it was just a bad dream, but when we went back up to the attic to put the beach stuff back the mannequins were in different spots and weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but it happened, and I've been scared shitless of mannequins ever since. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and coddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. Any night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. Next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that, while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote. But he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. In my childhood home I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home, and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear Mum typing away at the computer. Any day I got up and called out to Mum assuming she was down there working as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there, so I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse, as if someone was frustrated. Any morning I was eating my breakfast when I heard Mum at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too, when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try catch whatever was causing it and to try discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years, and we learned just to kind of live with it, as it wasn't every day. I was down there once when the ceiling light bulb in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared, the whole mysterious typing, you know. If I hadn't ran I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time I was on the computer at home by myself when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder near my ear. I've never ran so fast in my life and was hesitant going in that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, not scary. Still makes my heart race when I think about it. Today. Have never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something in which scientists don't have a proper explanation for yet. Pretty sure I lived in a haunted house for a while. Strange things. For one, I always felt like I was being watched in my room, and if I had the door open to the hallway I would swear I'd see someone walk by out of the corner of my eye. We had 2 cats, and some ones they'd be in my room sleeping, and then all of a sudden they would sit bolt up and stare at the door, and nothing I did could move them for a long time. This happened often. Any day in my bathroom the shelf that had my sister's beauty stuff randomly lose hold of all of the items. The thing was the shelf wasn't loose or hanging and all the stuff had to bounce out of a 2-inch high lip into the sink. Any time in the middle of the night my sister's 100-plus-year-old dresser she got as a gift from her grandma just fell over. This thing weighed a ton and it was built like a tank. Sister said she heard the sound of someone pushing. Mom and sister used to yell at me for sneaking around the house only I wasn't home or I was in my room. They said they saw a man in shadows that was about my height. Any day we also ran into the old owner and my mom casually asked the lady if she had ever experienced anything in the house. The lady started crying and said no one believed her, but yes, she experienced a lot of stuff. I moved out around that time. I do not miss that place. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitor center with offices, and then the house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times I was there alone. One winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off a circuit to the whole property, and I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house, and then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought that maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitor center on my walkie-talkie and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left, and that all the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half-mile up to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day. I live in a condominium and we own 2 apartments on the 7th and 8th floor. The only way to move in between them is to step out of the apartment, take the elevator or the staircase, and enter the other one. Any night, we ran out of ice cream upstairs, and my mom told me to go get some from the downstairs freezer, so I took the keys to the 7th floor's apartment, and since it was dinner time, no one was there. I walked into the pitch dark and realized that someone was sitting on the sofa, so I flipped the switch to see my dad just sitting there. It was kinda weird, but I just went to get the ice cream and asked if he had a key to lock up. No answer. I shrugged and thought, well, if he came in and locked the door behind him, he must have one. Went back upstairs and my dad was sitting there eating dinner. I freaked out and asked, how the heck did he get up here so fast, and everyone told me that he's been here all this time. Told them it wasn't possible cause I just saw him downstairs, but no one believed me. Now I never go down there alone. I know I'm a bit late, but I have a good story for this. So a few years back, probably 6 to 7 years, my family was living in our previous home. This was our second house and we had in Ohio. The first house was about 2 streets over from our second house. Well, one night my mom woke me up and was acting really panicked. She grabbed my brother, who was probably 5 at the time, and told me to go outside. It was about 4 in the morning, and once we all got outside my dad tried to calm my mom down. He asked her what was wrong, and she had explained that she had a dream that we were all gonna die from carbon monoxide poisoning if we stayed in the house. Then my dad told her that all the detectors were working perfectly fine and we decided to go back inside. We didn't smell anything, nor did the detectors go off, so we went to bed. The next day my mom was watching the morning news before we went to school. The first story for the day was that a local family was rushed out of their home because of a carbon monoxide leak in their home. Which could have been just coincidence, but then the news station showed the house. It was our old house that we just moved out of. There is actually a few stories that are pretty supernatural that I have about my family, but this is the shortest one to be honest. Family moved into an old house 200 plus years when I was 10. Uncle, weird guy, was going to help us move in, and when we got inside the house he got all weird and left. Always avoided coming for birthdays etc. We always joked he saw a ghost and for some reason we nicknamed the ghost Billy. When my little sister started talking she would say really weird things, like asking if we can shut her door at night so she doesn't have to see the boy walking down the hallway. Fucking creepy. Anyways, we thought she was also just being a big weirdo, so we continued to have this Billy the ghost joke. Something would get misplaced, must be Billy yada yada. A few years later we ripped up the flooring because we wanted to go back to the original hardwood that had been covered up forever ago by old owners, and if you know anything about old houses, you know they used to insulate the floor with newspaper when newspaper just became a thing. Decided to read some articles for fun, some talking about the first ever refrigerators, really cool things like that. Until we got to the creepy part, a mentally challenged boy named Billy who lived in our home, died while playing outside of it. I saw a lot of shit growing up in that house, but I'm not a huge ghost believer. The newspaper was a fucking creepy coincidence though, given that for years we had an ongoing Billy the ghost joke. Uncle also ended up telling us years later that when he pulled into the driveway and was outside of the house, he just got this awful feeling. My wife and I were asleep one night and I woke up suddenly and felt like someone was at the foot of our bed. I opened my eyes and saw a woman standing there who looked just like this at the foot of my bed. She slowly turned towards me and just stared. Not being fully awake yet, my brain couldn't get fully afraid but was instead curious and confused as to why there was another person in the room. I sat up and reached toward the woman, trying to figure out if she was real or not. When my hand reached her face, she disappeared. My wife woke up at this point and asked me what I was doing. All I could say was that I thought I saw something. We both laid back down facing each other and closed our eyes. Not a minute later, we both heard this guttural roar growl that sounded like a mix between a bear, lion, and howler monkey emanating from behind our headboard. There's nothing behind that wall since it's an outside second-story wall. She immediately began screaming and I searched the house from top to bottom. We never found out what made that noise. Took us a while to sleep in our bedroom again.